In August of 2025, the Supreme Court of India made a very controversial decision requiring all of Delhi's 1 million stray dogs to be shifted to mass shelters. The order was eventually retracted following a significant amount of uproar and protest amongst animal activists, urban planners, conservationists, and ecologists. In this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast, I am joined by Arshyaan Shahid to talk about this very nuanced free ranging dog crisis in India and potential solutions. We talk about the factors which led to the free ranging dog population in India to explode to over 60 million dogs. We also discuss why dogs are not actually a part of the natural ecosystem and are considered invasive species. Arshian also elaborates upon the insane amount of ecological damage caused by India's 60 million free ranging dogs. We talk about how sterilization is not always the most effective solution in handling a dog population. Tune in to listen to a very insightful and scientifically backed discussion on this very controversial issue. Welcome, Arshan, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you very much.
So, before we dive into the recent Supreme Court order, let's just talk about how Delhi's dog crisis came to being.
The scale of the crisis, as far as I understand it, it's very huge. Like India, faces one of the world's largest stray dog population, and it's estimated at like 60 million free-ranging dogs nationwide. That's like 6 crore individuals, and Delhi alone is estimated to have between 800,000 to 1 million stray dogs, making it like a very critical hotspot in the country. Like this represents approximately one dog for every 25 people in Delhi. So that also tells you how many people live in Delhi as well and how crowded it's becoming. And the most of the recent official dog census in Delhi was conducted in 2009. So like you can see how far back, we are kind of on research, on latest research. The last census was in 2009. It's been like almost 20 years since the last census. And that time it was around 550,000 animals. But estimates suggest that the population has nearly doubled since then. And the lack of accurate population data also poses significant challenges. Like Delhi's last comprehensive survey, which was like a proper scientific survey done by Dr. Lex Hibby, it covered only 4 zones in South Delhi during 2016, and it recorded nearly 200,000 dogs. But like recently, a 2024 study, which hasn't been published yet, it is claiming that approximately 550 dogs reside per square kilometer. And basically that suggests that the population is roughly 800,000 to 900,000 dogs, which is 15 times higher than the 2019 census figures.
So, but what led to this issue? Like, why do we have so many dogs, especially in Delhi? Like obviously nationally, that's a broader discussion. But why does Delhi specifically have such a big issue?
So, Delhi specifically also has this big of an issue because, first of all, again, as we've talked about, that Delhi has a lot of people in it, and dogs have always been synanthropic animals. They're always been synanthropic, so they always reside alongside humans, around humans, and humans have subsidized their feeding so much that they are getting uninterrupted food without any fear of predators. It's very normal. If you have an animal which you are giving them enough food to sustain their development, to sustain their reproduction, and there is no limiting factor to them. There is no predator. There is no shortage of food or resources or space. Then, there will be an exponential growth, and that is what we've been seeing in Delhi for a very long time. It's been going completely unchecked. So, at this point, dogs, they are facing resource challenges, but the problem is they are very fierce competitors, and they are basically kicking out the remaining species around the area in order to occupy those spaces as well. That is, and like, alongside Delhi has a lot of waste production, a lot of open waste dump yards like Gazipur dump yard is one of the famous dump yards, which is basically like a hill of garbage. So like those are like one of the few reasons why Delhi has so many dogs at this point.
So why should we be concerned about the issue, particularly in terms of public health and safety? And what implications does this have on urban wildlife?
So the public health crisis, in my opinion, is staggering because like India reports over 3.7 million dog bite cases annually, with Delhi alone recording like 68,000 cases in 2024. More alarmingly, India accounts for like 36% of world's rabies deaths. Most of the countries, rabies have been completely exterminated, but in India, which is supposed to be like the biggest democracy in the world, like one of the biggest GDP capitals of the world, and still we haven't been able to exterminate rabies from our country, which is kind of a shame. And with an estimated 18,000 to 20,000 people dying from rabies each year, that is not a very great look. This represents like a 70% increase in dog bite cases from 2022 to 2024. So they are progressively getting worse and worse. And children under 15 years are particularly vulnerable because if you look at most cases, they are mostly on children because they are easy prey. They're like, they comprise roughly 20% of all bite victims. And this causes a substantial amount of economic burden as well because treatment costs are there, loss of productivity, and healthcare infrastructure costs are also there. Alongside, the government has to pay a certain amount of money as like as like kind of compensation for the bite victims. So that kind of puts a very significant strain on public resources as well.
And what about the impacts on wildlife?
Yeah, so basically dogs are invasive predators. Okay, so the scientific evidence has overwhelmingly demonstrated that free ranging dogs attack nearly 80 species of wildlife in India. And you would be surprised to know that 31 of these are IUCN red list threatened species. Like, four critically endangered species. This makes dogs the third worst human introduced predators globally, as they come after cats and rats, which are like, on the first and the second place in terms of the worst human introduced predator. And research has been showing that 48% of dogs attack on wildlife and they occur in and around the protected areas, the so-called protected areas, which at this point of time cannot be really called protected areas since the dogs are encroaching those spaces and kind of pushing the wildlife out of there. And it indicates that even our, like, most protected ecosystems cannot be completely immune if we don't take any actions. And like large mammals, particularly ungulates like the spotted deers, the sambars and the blackbucks and the nilgai, they bear the brunt of the predation. Cheetal or the spotted deer in particular, they have been noticed to bear 34% of all dog attacks on wildlife. And critically endangered species like the great Indian bustard, some other ground nesting birds, and various vulture species also are facing severe threat from dog packs. As we know that since 1995, due to diclofenac, the white-rumped vultures and other vulture species have been pushed to the brink of extinction. And after that, the black kites kind of occupied the niche, and the dogs have been aggressively occupying that niche. So now, even if the vultures, even if we try to bring back the vultures, where do they even go? Because their niche has been, already occupied completely. And for once, they can even compete with the kites, but they have nothing, they can do nothing against these dogs that can go in packs and completely chase away any or all vultures that come to an area for carcass or on garbage dumps. And like ecosystem disruption is also going beyond predation because dogs impact wildlife through multiple mechanisms. Okay, it's not just predation. There is behavioral disruption as wildlife avoid areas with dog presence, that compression in many places. There is disease transmission, which is one of the major threats, as dogs serve as vectors for rabies, parvovirus, and other pathogens. There is also competition for resources as dogs compete with the native carnivores for prey and territory. So, like carnivores such as, or sorry, like scavengers such as the hyenas, or mesocarnivores such as the golden jackals are facing a lot of competition from these dogs, which are not letting these predators occupy their natural space. Then there is also one of very overlooked part, which is hybridization, because dogs can interbreed with closely related wild species like wolves and oftentimes jackals as well. This is reducing the natural gene pool of the wolves because they are continuously or oftentimes hybridizing with dogs.
So, a lot of the so-called animal activists dismiss the fact that dogs are having on wildlife, claiming that free-ranging dogs are a natural part of the ecosystem. But is this claim actually scientifically valid? Why are domestic dogs often considered as invasive species across most natural ecosystems?
So argument that dogs are natural part of urban ecosystems is scientifically unfounded, because urban ecology research has demonstrated that healthy urban ecosystems require native species assemblages and not human subsidized predators. And dog is a human subsidized predator. And dogs qualify as invasive species. A lot of people might call them as natural part of the ecosystems and not an invasive species because they were born here and they are always a part of the ecosystem. But that is not the case if we talk from the perspective of evolution, because because dogs will be qualified as invasive species in most natural ecosystem, as dogs have evolved through human selection and not through any natural process. And the second reason why they will be considered invasive is because they have no natural population control methods. They have no predators apart from the leopards, which are starting to feed on dogs quite often. But apart from that, they have no natural predators. They have abundant food sources through human provisioning, and they are causing a lot of ecological harms, as there are negative impacts that are documented on native species and ecosystem processes. And they are like one of the key features of an invasive species is how rapidly it spreads. And we have seen that dogs have very high reproductive rates, especially when they are provisioned by humans. They are disposing very often, whether it be through human mediation or on their own.
The next question is, India has seen extensive sterilization drives around the country to control the dog population. Why we always focus on sterilization, and how effective has it been so far? Consider that there's over 60 million dogs. Is it even feasible financially and logistically to sterilize our way out of the issue?
So, I will talk about the sterilization first and what are basically the benchmarks for it. So, the World Health Organization recommends 70% sterilization coverage for actual effective population control, though some experts suggest that 90% coverage of at least the females is necessary. Like Lucknow's ABC program achieved remarkable success with 84.3% coverage, resulting in 50% reduction in birth rates from 8 newborns per 100 dogs in 2019 to under 4 in 2025. However, the logistics are daunting to say the least. Delhi would need to sterilize approximately 560,000 to 700,000 dogs to achieve meaningful population control. Think about that number. That is a huge number. And our current capacity allows for only 125,000 sterilization at this point of time. And at it roughly costs 1,250 rupees to sterilize one dog. So achieving 70% coverage would cost over 875 crore rupees annually for Delhi alone. And sterilization has its own limitation because there is also immigration pressure. So you might know about vacuum effect. So people say that, okay, if you remove dogs or if you sterilize dogs, what will happen is the sterilized territories can be recolonized by fertile dogs from adjacent areas. And the second problem can be incomplete coverage because, like, how to catch dogs? Some can be aggressive, some can be wary, and oftentimes they remain unsterilized. And most of the times, if you yourself in, like, the shoes of the workers who are actually sterilizing and picking up these dogs, want to pick a dog who is easy to pick up. You wouldn't want to go after a very aggressive dog for and chase them for several kilometers just to catch one dog. So, like, anyone, any normal human being would just catch whatever dog is easiest to catch and take them to sterilization, which means that unless and until we go for 100% sterilization, we will leave some aggressive, sick, or shy and wary dogs. And then the other problem is the time lag because population level effect take 3 to 5 years to manifest, which is like, again, we'll have to continue sterilizing every single year for 3 to 5 years at 875 crores annually to be able to see any actual difference. And behavioral impacts are also there because sterilization doesn't eliminate total aggression or predatory behavior because aggression doesn't just come from rabies or the parvovirus. It has several factors, and it can vary from individual dog based on their personality as well. So again, it's very difficult to actually rate aggression and, like, how to control their behavior and and predatory behavior as well.
So, obviously, given how long-term and logistically difficult sterilization is, that is obviously a challenge. But the impacts that dogs are having on the wildlife are immediate. And from personal experience, like I've seen that in some places like Ladakh, in a span of 5, 6 years, a lot of species have been really badly affected by dogs, and we don't have the time in some areas to wait for such a long-term solution. And we need immediate solutions to prevent the damage of dogs on wildlife. So, what do you think are some short-term immediate solutions which can mitigate the impacts of dogs on wildlife? Is culling an option? And do you want to discuss like the scientific and ethical issues with that?
So, as you've said, like, from your personal experiences as well, you've seen and noticed a lot of dog pressure and dogs attacking wildlife. I have seen similarly in during my work in Palamu Tiger Reserve, during my work in Asolabati Wildlife Sanctuary, and also in Bharatpur Sanctuary. I have seen, like, in Asolabati Wildlife Sanctuary, it's very common to see dogs trying to chase cheetahs, dogs trying to chase nilgais and everything, and especially their newborn calves. It's very often that they predate on these animals, which causes a certain amount of pressure. And more than that, I think an overlooked part of an ecosystem, which nobody really talks about, is the ground nesting birds. At least the bigger ungulates have some sort of defense against these predators, right? The bigger ungulates have their horns to maybe ward off the dogs or, like, at least have some fighting chance. But if you think about these ground nesting birds, it's like actually really difficult for them to ward off any kind of dog attacks. And they are the biggest victims of dogs in terms of, like, in terms of predation. There was also in Bharatpur Sanctuary, there was one bird, I think it was the Siberian crane or something. They were trying to introduce, like, artificial breeding programs there. But because of dog predation, the dog predation rate was so high that the entire program completely failed. It was a huge blow to the scientists involved in it. It was a huge financial blow, a morale blow. So it becomes really difficult to deal with these situations. And you're completely correct. Sterilization and all these things will take effect in, like, a substantially long time, and if they are even able to happen. So culling is one of the options. Again, it's a very controversial point considering that it's a big ethical issues. A lot of countries have taken culling as their only option. For example, in Russia, there is culling, and in Japan, there is culling. In America itself, they had culling. But every single country where they have introduced culling, they have faced severe backlash from public as well as the the NGOs and a lot of organization that work for the humane treatment of animals. And I completely agree that on some level it is unethical. And oftentimes people would say that we should leave them as is, as they are natural and they can deal with themselves. The problem is us humans have disturbed the ecosystem so much that unless and until we intervene, it is going to die. People don't understand the fact that what they are doing is putting misguided sorry, they are putting misguided compassion towards the dog. I agree with their compassion. I agree that we shouldn't decide dies and who doesn't die as a species. But the problem is we must decide as one of the only sentient beings present on earth who can make these decisions. It is up to us at this point to make balance return to our ecosystem. Because if we let the dog population go unchecked, what will happen is they will push away the mesocarnivores, the scavengers such as hyenas, golden jackals, vultures, and other small animals which live off scraps. They will push them away and maybe push them to extinction. They will cause a lot of that way. The population will keep increasing till we subsidize them through feeding. What will happen is it will increase the aggression, it will increase the food competition, and because they are not getting enough food, they will turn their aggression towards humans. So, what the people are doing through feeding, they are actually putting themselves more at risk from dog attacks because dogs will increase in number and then they will need more space, they will need more food, and they will start attacking us. And when, because when they do that, there will be a lot of increase in disease spread. And slowly the ecosystem as a whole will start collapsing. So at the end of the day, either they get killed or either we all get killed. And we have to make that decision. Either we control their population or we die alongside the dogs and alongside several other species.
I'm going to bring up the question about feeding dogs in a bit, but before that, are there any other solutions other than culling to mitigate the impacts on wildlife which dogs are having, other than culling and sterilization?
So, other than culling and sterilization, the main changes that you can make is extensive patrolling to keep dogs away. You have to make shelters so that you can pick up the dogs nearby that are living nearby the protected areas, and you put them in those shelters or you relocate them. You make sure that there are strict boundaries and no dog. Basically, it will have to be a compliance issue and a human issue. You make sure that the protected areas have zero dogs and zero dogs are allowed inside it. So the borders should be perfect. There should be no holes from where dogs can enter. No one should be allowed to take their dogs in. This will mean that the villages, the villages that are present inside the sanctuaries, inside the national parks, they will have to comply with this as well, which is another problem. Because how will you make them part ways with their dogs, which help them oftentimes protect their cattle, which help them protect themselves against predators or animal raids? So that again is a whole new issue. But if we are talking about this issue isolated, then that is the only way. You'll have to remove every single dog from the area and ward off the complete area through strict fences so that the dogs can't enter it.
And about the feeding, so a lot of the animal activists claim that feeding does not uh, encourage aggression and dog bites, but there have been studies on other species, such as the bats in Bandipur, which have found that artificial feeding of animals by humans increases aggression in animals and increases the dependence of many species on human feeding. So, wait, one second, I'll just this is a late
Sure,
one
sure.
second, because the question is a bit later, so I'll just
Yes, sure.
Uh, in some cases, it even leads to so obviously with when these ecological and behavioral concerns, what do you think about the practice of feeding stray dogs or community dogs? Do you think it should be allowed? And if so, because obviously the people feeding the dogs are doing it out of compassion, but it's exactly uh, a scientifically safe option. But so, what do you think is an alternative?
So, as you said, that research on feeding wild species or urban species has consistently demonstrated that they have negative outcomes because they develop behavioral dependencies, and animals such as dogs, such as macaques, such as a lot of other urban bird species, they lose their natural foraging skills. This causes population inflation, so the carrying capacity increases artificially on the sustainable levels, and which increases aggression because the competition around feeding sites intensifies conflicts as well. This increases disease transmission, which is again, these all factors are linked with each other. So like it's kind of a vicious cycle where if one factor increases, the other factor increases side by side. If aggression increases, they will bite each other, which will increase the disease. And when the disease transmission increases, it will increase aggression. So like it's again a vicious cycle, which is very difficult to get out of. And there is also habitat compression because what animals do, according to the optimal foraging theory, they cluster around food sources and oftentimes abandon their natural territories as well. And now this, if we apply this to dog feeding, because feeding promotes population growth by reducing their natural mortality. Because maybe if dog lays a litter of 6 pups, only 3 would have survived if it was in completely natural surroundings. But because out of our misguided compassion, we feed them, we feed their babies, which leads to reducing their infant mortality or adult mortality. Then at a point where a dog, let's say it's a sick individual, it's an old individual which cannot forage for its own food. Sure, that means that the time is at end and that dog will die soon, and basically the cycle will repeat. But what we are doing, we are providing that sick dog, we are providing that old dog with artificial food sources. We are providing them, we are hand feeding them food, which is leading to them living on for a couple more years, laying a couple more litters, which is again increasing the population growth. And now this also increases territory overlap. And whenever there is going to be territory overlap, because dogs are strongly territorial, it will create more aggression. And because this also creates artificial aggregation, such as as we talked earlier about garbage dump sites, which are huge and open. When dogs aggregate around those areas, they facilitate disease spread because dogs from different territories are coming in at one place for foraging. They are spreading disease amongst one another, and when they return back to their respective territories, they spread their diseases further. This also enhances the survival of reproductively capable individual, which again accelerates population growth. Now, feeding studies show that dogs provided with enrichment feeding exhibit a more natural behavior and reduced stress, but this doesn't translate to a population level benefit when applied to free ranging population. So, yes, if you feed one particular dog, it will get less stressed, it might behave more naturally, but at the end of the day, that will result in inflation of population, which will result in increase of disease, which will increase in which will lead to an increase in aggression and bites once again. So the paradox of compassionate feeding is that it's well intentioned most of the times, but it creates a lot of ecological harm through population subsidy effect. It causes human dog conflict as territorial boundaries break down more and more. It causes a greater wildlife predation as well fed dogs have the energy to hunt, actively hunt. And this also makes them a disease reservoir. because by supporting infected and diseased individuals who would otherwise succumb to death, we are giving them an increased lifespan to spread their diseases even further.
Now, coming to the controversial Supreme Court order, could you just provide a brief overview of this ruling, its current legal status, and why has it been so controversial?
Okay, so the original August 11th order, according to that, the Supreme Court initially directed Delhi authorities to remove all stray dogs from public areas within 8 weeks and house them permanently in shelters. This order arose from a suo motu cognizance of rising rabies cases and dog bite incidents, particularly involving children. There was one particular case which really pushed the Supreme Court to make this decision. This decision was soon modified on August 22nd, however, because they faced massive public outcry and practical impossibilities. So the court modified its stance to align with the animal birth control rules of 2023, and they revised their mandates. They said that now they will use the CSVR method, which was basically the method from the Netherlands, by which they were able to attain 100% sterilization rate, which means capture, sterilize, vaccinate, and release. That will be the case for most dogs, but they will permanently remove rabid or aggressive dogs. They will establish designed feeding zones and designated feeding zones in each municipal ward, and there will be a prohibition on street feeding outside designed areas. The problem is it still remains controversial because there is infrastructure gap. Delhi lacks sufficient shelter capacities for even 5% of its dog population. MCD reportedly said that they had the capacity of 1,200 to 1,500 dogs as of now. And we have 800,000 dogs. That's an insane amount of dogs for which we do not have any shelters. There is also the definitional ambiguity because they said the Supreme Court ordered the removal of aggressive dogs. But what exactly is an aggressive dog? There is no clear criteria identifying aggressive dogs. That is one of the points that I am trying to up as a research question for my own PhD to figure out a scale of aggression and find the aggressive hotspots in Delhi itself, where, like, what are the factors that are linked with aggressions? Why some dogs are more aggressive than others? And what are all the reasons associated with it? Now, there are also enforcement challenges because, again, the government has limited personnel and resources for implementation. There is conflicting stakeholder interests as well because animal welfare advocates are pushing one side, whereas public safety concerns are pushing the other sides. So mass shelters and mass shelters are also not viable at this point because housing Delhi's estimated 800,000 dogs would require 10 to 45 square feet per dog for humane condition, which means 10 to 45 million square feet of shelter space, which is equivalent to 2,000 plus acres of land, which means 3 crore daily feeding costs, which is 1,000 crores annually. And if you remember, just sterilizing 70% or 80% dogs would in itself cause 1,000 crore rupees annual expenditure. Alongside that, we'll have to hire thousands of staff members, veterinary facilities, and transport infrastructures, which is, again, a very big monetary load, which will have to be borne by the public themselves through taxes.
So obviously, there are many welfare issues with the idea of mass shelters and stuff, but some can argue that the stray dogs living on streets and garbage dumps in extreme climates, they also don't have the best living conditions. So what is your opinion about this? Like, given that both realities are true, and what is your opinion about that?
Okay, so there is definitely The issue of the welfare of dogs and street life for dogs often involves malnutrition, disease, injury, parasitic infection. Vehicle strikes are one of the major causes of mortality. Interdog aggression and territorial disputes are a major cause of, like, welfare problems in dogs. Exposure to extreme weather condition is also one of the major problems. However, poorly managed shelters can be equally problematic as well, because overcrowding can lead to stress and disease transmission. Inadequate veterinary care and nutrition can lead to a lot of problem. It can cause psychological trauma from confinement, and high mortality rate are often the case in substandard facilities. There have been a lot of global management strategies as well, especially considering the welfare angle. So again, as I mentioned earlier, Netherlands chose to go the welfare route, and they achieved virtual elimination of strays through nationwide capture, neuter, vaccinate, and return programs with 100% compliance rates. They had strict anti-abandonment laws with heavy penalties. They had tax incentives favoring adoption over purchasing, and it overall led to a cultural shift towards responsible ownership, where 90% households started adopting dogs instead of buying dogs. Singapore itself ended up sterilizing a bunch of its dogs. The problematic approaches, mostly related to welfare, happened in Turkey, Japan, and USA, because Turkey faced backlash during 2024 over the massacre law, because they mandated the removal of 4 million street dogs. They authorized euthanasia for sick, aggressive animals. They had insufficient shelter infrastructure for implementation as well, which led to mass protests from animal welfare organizations. Japan oftentimes uses gas chambers for euthanasia, and USA also basically euthanized 330,000 dogs in 2023. So the welfare issue is very nuanced, I would say, and it is very difficult to say that they are already having welfare issues as is. So why should we put any work in? But more than because if the dogs had a higher mortality rate than the natality rate, we would never have this problem to begin with. So I think even though the welfare problem is an issue, currently controlling dog population is more important.
So beyond sterilization, culling, and mass shelters, what needs to be done ecologically to prevent this issue from occurring again and to prevent the current population from expanding further? Like, for example, like would waste management help, or would any other ecological interventions help?
So, first of all, the first thing I would say is that, like right now, the Supreme Court ordered the removal of dogs and whatnot from Delhi in itself. That would be completely useless. If we want to control dog population, we will have to do it on a pan-India level. We'll have to do it simultaneously at every place in India. We would have to sterilize and neuter dogs all over India at once. Because what will happen if, let's say, hypothetically speaking, we are able to remove all the dogs from Delhi and put them in shelters. Like hypothetically, we have enough land, enough manpower, enough resources to do all that. What will happen is the dogs from adjacent areas such as Rajasthan or Haryana or Uttar Pradesh, what they will do is they will find a vacuum. This is known as the vacuum effect. What will happen is these dogs will enter Delhi and start reproducing there, because they will have a lot of resources, a lot of free space. So the problem will not disappear at all. It will stay there. It will only be the space will only be occupied by dogs from other areas. So that is definitely not the solution. Systematic urban planning is definitely one of the solution, because one of the current problems we have is open waste dumps, garbage management, which provides abundant food sources, artificially inflating the carrying capacity. This creates a feedback loop where dog population exceed what the natural environment could support. So the solutions could be closed waste systems with secured containers, organic waste processing to eliminate food sources, Community composting is also one of the things that has been practicing in other countries because it reduces the street accessible waste, and penalty system for improper waste disposal would have to bring public compliance in this if we want to get rid of this problem. So there needs to be a penalty system for disposal. And we also have to develop some kind of a responsible ownership framework where, like, we are like making it mandatory to register and microchip all dogs. There should be a licensing fee that fund population and management programs. There should be owner liability laws for dog related victims. And there should be education programs on responsible pet care and population control. As like Singapore's model, they require registration, vaccination, and sterilization with heavy penalties for non-compliance. And a lot of spatial planning approaches are also needed, such as zoning strategies. So there should be dog-free zones around schools, hospitals, and wildlife areas, which can be considered vulnerable. There should be designated off-leash areas for community dogs. There should be buffer zones between urban areas and protected ecosystems. There should be green corridor designs that facilitate wildlife movements as well as limit dog access at the same time. Because research backed insights show that strategic placement of feeding stations can influence dog territorial patterns and heavily reduce wildlife conflict.
So earlier in the podcast, you mentioned about your PhD. Why don't you talk a bit more about your research?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I had this idea for a while. I've been always interested in urban ecology, and I was contemplating whether to do this research because I feel like both dogs and rhesus macaques are a problem in a city, in an urban city like Delhi. The main issue, the main reason why I chose dogs was because out of all the rabies cases, 95% of the cases are related to dog bites. So even though monkeys are also a huge problem, the major problematic animals are dogs themselves, which are causing most harm. So I decided that because I have realized already that if we actually want to control population, we must involve the local stakeholders, the local people of the area in it. Because we can't just put a blanket law about euthanizing dogs or removing dogs completely from an area because the public would never support it. They would always oppose it, and no work can be done without public participation. In Nepal specifically, they have been able to reach 100% sterilization rate for a course of 2 years. 100% sterilization, that is 20% above the WHO norms. And how did they do it? Because the king of Nepal ordered it and there was 100% compliance rate. They invested $3 million just to get rid of the problem. And also there are other nuanced factors as well, such as the fact that Bhutan is a small place and there is only like dogs there in to begin with. So, but still, at the end of the day, it was a very big feat that they were able to establish and achieve just on the basis of public participation. So, one of the major reasons or the major ideas which I wanted to work on is to find a middle ground between government conservationists as well as public and the welfare groups so that they can come to a middle ground and they can work together instead of opposite of each other to get rid of the dog problem. That is like one of the major or the key points which I want to achieve through my research.
And yep, that was the final question I had for you today. Thank you so much for your time. It really has been an insightful conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on your podcast as well.